All right. So you're working on a team project and you're pretty sure you just spotted a big red flag. Do you tell your lead? Or do you think that if you tell your lead, you'll actually suffer some blowback? Maybe it'll become your problem. Maybe you'll be blamed for the problem. Maybe you might just keep it to yourself instead. Let somebody else handle the blowback. This is an issue of lacking psychological safety. But our next talk will hopefully help you avoid some of those issues. Derek Kwan is an organizational culture specialist and a producer at Cozy Comic Games. His talk today will hopefully help foster more psychological safety in your conversations, and I honestly think that this stretches beyond the workplace into just life in general. So please welcome to the stage Derek Kwan.
Hello, Game Devs of Color. It's a pleasure to be here once again. The last time I was here, I spoke a bit about organizational culture and its importance in building strong and sustainable studios. Today, I'm going to be talking about fostering psychological safety, also to build strong and sustainable studios. So I have to admit that I'm a bit obsessed with organizational design and development because I'm a Giga nerd. I care a lot about studios that are good places to work and that the people working for studios can have good lives. Too often, making games, something that we love, is corrupted by unhealthy working environments driven by ego, by greed capitalism, and a lack of understanding around how we make things better. These are the things that I obsess over, and I might have a bit of a problem, but by the end of this talk, I'm hoping that I can answer a few questions for you. One, what psychological safety is. Two, why it's important for your studio. And three, what you can do to foster it. Of course, before I get into that, you should probably know a little bit about me, just so you know that I'm not completely talking out of my ass. So most of my career has been spent in production, team development, and building strong organizational cultures in organizations big and small. I've also been a community organizer for indie game development since 2012, and I'm currently one of 6 co-owners of Cozy Comic Games Cooperative. I also co-run the Game Discovery Exhibition, which is Canada's largest indie games festival, where we host dozens of indie studios for free over 10 days to over 150,000 attendees. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about psychological safety. And for that, I'm going to turn to someone much smarter than me, the famous Amy Edmondson. So Amy defines psychological safety as the belief that the environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. People feel able to speak up when needed with relevant ideas, questions, or concerns without being shut down in a gratuitous way. Psychological safety is present when colleagues trust and respect each other and feel able, even obligated, to be candid. Amy points out that when psychological safety is absent in the workplace, our colleagues are more likely to engage in self-protection attitudes and behaviors because of fear, discomfort, looking incompetent, and challenging the norm. Now, this is bad. You've probably heard about Google's research into high-performance teams, and the number one factor in their success is psychological safety. That's why this is important. But before we dive into how to foster psychological safety, let's also talk about some myths about psychological safety, because I've often seen and heard a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding of what it actually is. So psychological safety is, it's not a goal. It's a means to a goal. It's also not intended to fulfill the purpose of team effectiveness, collaboration, innovation, and inclusion. It is not a panacea. Psychological safety is also not just about being nice. It's about openness and honesty and not about performative politeness. Psychological safety is also not conflict-free. It's about conflicts being able to occur in a safer manner. And it's about productive disagreement, which can also lead to conflict, again, which we learn how to handle in a safer way. Psychological safety is not criticism-free. It's about constructive critique and feedback, not about no critique. And psychological safety doesn't mean that all ideas are accepted. Rather, it means that the presentation of those ideas can be done without fear. And psychological safety is not a cure-all for high performance. For high performance, you also need motivation and accountability. So I always like to point people in the direction of the Mental Health Commission of Canada, because they're pretty far ahead in terms of understanding what it takes to create psychologically healthy workplaces. So if you're interested in learning more about how to implement these 13 factors, you can visit mentalhealthcommission.ca, or you can reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about these things. But I'll leave that up for a second as you look at it. But otherwise, let's talk about psychologically safe behaviors and our responsibilities around them. So let's compare and contrast. In a psychologically safe environment, mistakes are okay because they are viewed as learning opportunities. We also share ideas and information freely because knowledge and wisdom gives us the capacity to collectively weather challenges together. You're also going to find that debate, lively discourse, and disagreements are normal, and that conflicts can take place regularly. But again, these conflicts are typically simple conflicts over ideas around how to make things better, rather than personal vendettas and drama that comes with battles over ego. Constructive feedback flows easily and is received gracefully because we all know that we're trying our best to build the best products. And leadership is viewed as caring, and they are respected. So in contrast, what does a psychologically unsafe environment look like? Well, it's frequently playing the blame game. People are deathly afraid to make mistakes because they fear looking bad or getting fired. No one shares anything. People don't feel safe to express their views. And there's a lot of gossip about of people complaining about others or talking about them behind their backs. Importantly, in a psychologically unsafe environment, feedback leads to conflict. You're not able to have productive conversations because people get angry when you try and provide that feedback. It's the proverbial walking on eggshells. In a psychologically unsafe environment as well, leaders are feared and in some ways they're isolated. There's usually a bubble of ignorance around leaders in a psychologically unsafe environment because they are not receiving the right information to inform them of organizational or game development challenges. And that leads us to one of the primary benefits of psychologically safe environments. And that's conversations. Conversations help us to learn, to connect with one another, and they help to drive high performance. Now, of course, to get high performance state, you still need accountability and motivation. And when you pair that with psychological safety, your studio will shift into the learning zone. You'll rapidly improve your production and development processes, your game, your community, and your business. And that's because you're crowdsourcing the knowledge of your team to elevate everything about your studio. And unfortunately, when you have high accountability and motivation and low psychological safety, you get into the anxiety zone. And this is a place where a lot of game developers sit because we care so strongly about what we're creating, but we lack the psychological safety to tell management, hey, there's a fire here. And then often what follows is apathy. If you lack the psychological safety to make a difference, the fact that you care just doesn't matter anymore. So you just collect that paycheck because what else can you do? Now, what's complicated about psychological safety is that you can have a very psychologically safe work environment for a while, but you might not have accountability or motivation. And that leads to the comfort zone where you can say things without fear, but nothing really gets actioned. So ironically, this can lead to the apathy zone again, because maintaining psychological safety itself requires accountability and motivation. So without accountability, motivation, and psychological safety, we're all regressing to the mean, but it actually takes effort and conversations to maintain a psychologically safe workplace. Now, you're probably interested in how we can foster psychological safety in our studios. And my number one tip for fostering psychological safety is to take it seriously, not personally. So every time you get some feedback, you're going to say, you know what, this isn't about me, this is about making things better. And this has a lot to do with ego. Overly personalizing issues decreases psychological safety. But when we have a core purpose around building our studio, releasing our amazing games, and living good lives as developers, it's easier to put our ego aside in order to create a more psychologically safe environment. Now let's talk about the interpersonal skills required to create a psychologically safe environment. The soft and social skills that we should all be thinking about. I mentioned ego, and while some ego is important because we want a sense of self and who we are, and that we have worth, that is important. But it is so easy to let our egos get the better of us, to assume that we cannot be wrong, that we are the main character, when in reality we have a team of capable humans all around us who are helping us to collectively and collaboratively achieve shared goals. So we can't blame others and cast judgments about who people are because that's not safe. But we can be vigilant and self-reflect about how our behaviors affect others. And that means that we have to have the discipline to self-reflect, self-correct, or self-regulate in order to improve. This self-discipline affects how others respond to us when we show up to work. Now, underpinning all of these interpersonal skills is a need to have an attitude of willingness to change our mindsets to place additional value on the team over ourselves. And sometimes this does require us to call one another in because sometimes our self-reflection just can't penetrate our ego. And just, calling in is inviting people back into the fold and not calling out, which is embarrassing others. And there can be times to call people out when harm is being done, but if we are all aligned around building a psychologically safe workplace, this is less necessary. I also want to talk about intraprofessionalism, which are the knowledge, skills, and aptitudes that we need in order to manage ourselves, as well as to help manage others. And this is more a message of those who aspire to be leaders and who want to take charge of fostering psychological safety in their studio. As leaders, we have lots of responsibilities, but lots of insecurities and uncertainties as to how we're doing. There's a lot resting on leaders' shoulders. So taking care of our own thoughts and emotions of how we come across is crucial. So there's anything that I can impress upon you as a leader, it's that we have to learn how to manage ourselves, but also understand that we're not going to be perfect at it because we too are humans. But if we try our best to manage ourselves and have control, 90 to 95% of the time, that's still a good goal to strive for. And this in turn affects the people whom we lead. When we manage ourselves, we help others to manage themselves. But we can't control the behavior of those whom we lead. But we can create the conditions of psychological safety under which they can tell us of their challenges, of their capabilities, and how we can work together to succeed. Even still, providing the invitation to have this conversation might not always lead to scenarios where psychological safety is possible. Because there is an inherent power dynamic from a leadership position that can sometimes challenge psychological safety. And if the culture of the organization puts leadership on a pedestal rather than creates an environment of servant leadership, it can be difficult to overcome. So this leads into some wicked problems around organizational culture and organizational design and its tensions with psychological safety, but that's a talk for another day. So overall, here are the key takeaways. Psychological safety is a journey, it's not a destination. It's going to take time to achieve psychological safety, and you're also going to need to be diligent about continually improving psychological safety and maintaining it at your studio. Psychological safety is also complex and multifaceted. And there are many elements that we did not talk about today that you can dive into on your own, or if you want to reach out to me and talk about it, I'm more than happy to do that. In addition, self-discipline and self-development around our own behaviors is super important for psychological safety. We need to self-reflect about how we show up with our teams and how we are managing ourselves to improve. And lastly, relationships are important. They're kind of the foundation of psychological safety. And the stronger our relationships are, the better we can foster it. And that's that. So if you'd like to connect with me, I can be reached via my information here. I'd love to connect with you on socials. I'm happy to talk about how to scale your studio while maintaining a strong organizational culture and building psychological safety, and how we can create the best conditions for a great place to work. If you're interested in the Game Discovery exhibition, you can also reach out to me about that.
Thank you so much for that talk, Derek. There was a quote that really stuck with me. I appreciated the early call out. Psychological safety is not a goal, it's a means to a goal. And when I think about that, it makes me think, psychological safety is not just a thing that you get or achieve. It's a state, something you work to hone and maintain in a relationship with other people. I think that is really incredible to think about. It also means that maybe you can use it in your relationships with people that are not just in the office. I'm just saying, like, you have better conversations, improve your life. It's great. If you would like to connect with Derek after the show, you can find him on the Bird site at Rice Rocketeer. Thank you again for that talk, Derek.